Okay, let's talk about what might just be the most influential animation studio you've never even heard of. Seriously, they were called UPA, and they didn't just make cartoons. No, they kicked off a visual revolution that completely changed the whole game. And trust me, their influence is everywhere you look today.
And their story, it's honestly one of the wildest in all of Hollywood history. I mean, it's a journey that starts on a picket line, right? With artists literally rebelling against Walt Disney himself, and it somehow ends with that very same studio bringing giant Japanese monsters to America. So the big question is, how on earth did a fight with Mickey Mouse lead directly to Godzilla? It sounds impossible, right?
All right, to get our heads around this absolutely incredible story, here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with that rebellion against the mouse. Then we'll see how they forged a new visual language, which led to their modernist golden age. But then things take a dark turn with the Red Scare's shadow, which leads to that unbelievable pivot from Magoo to Godzilla. And finally, we'll look at UPA's enduring ghost and how it's still with us today. Let's do it.
So first up, rebellion against the mouse. This whole thing doesn't start in a fancy studio. It starts on the street. It's 1941, and the entire creative soul of the animation world is about to just shatter during this really bitter, really divisive strike at Walt Disney Studio.
And look, this wasn't just about money. Not at all. It was a full-blown ideological battle, like a civil war for animation. On one side, you've got Walt Disney's vision, which was this very top-down, my way or the highway system. He demanded total loyalty to his quest for this super lush, cinematic realism. But on the other side, you had these artists who felt like cogs in a factory. Yeah, they wanted fair pay for sure, but what they really wanted was creative freedom. They didn't want to just copy life. They wanted to interpret it.
So the artists who walked out, they went and formed their own little studio. And their first clients weren't Hollywood bigwigs. They were the US government and, get this, progressive labor unions. And this part is so important. These early films they made, propaganda stuff and educational shorts like Hellbent for Election or the totally groundbreaking anti-racism short Brotherhood of Man, this became their creative lab. It was where they could experiment and cook up a new style that was politically sharp and visually just out there.
Okay, so this leads us to their new visual language, rejecting realism for modernism. And this right here is where the real revolution kicks off. UPA basically looked at the animation rulebook and just threw it in the trash. They decided animation should stop trying to be a wannabe live-action movie and start being what it actually is, moving modern art.
And their secret weapon? It was something called limited animation. Now, I know what you're thinking. When we hear that, we think of cheap, kind of junky Saturday morning cartoons, right? But for UPA, oh no, it was a powerful artistic philosophy. The whole idea was that a few really strong, super stylized poses could actually have more impact than 1,000 perfectly smooth, realistic drawings. It was all about design and impact, not just saving a buck.
I love this chart because it perfectly lays out their battle plan. Just look at it. On every single front, UPA did the exact opposite of Disney. Disney was chasing deep, realistic space. UPA said, nope, we love that it's flat. Let's embrace it. Disney's characters needed perfect anatomy. UPAs were just cool, abstract shapes. And my favorite part is the color. For Disney, color described things. An apple is red. For UPA, color was about emotion. A character wasn't just feeling jealous. Their whole world could literally turn green with envy. It was a completely different way of seeing.
And this radical new way of doing things, it wasn't some niche art house experiment, no way. It launched them directly into their golden age. We're talking massive success, both with critics and audiences, and they started winning Oscars like crazy by just breaking all the rules.
So forget talking mice and ducks. UPA's stars were people. Complicated, weird, often difficult people. You had Mr. Magoo, this nearsighted, stubborn old guy who was basically a walking satire of anyone who refused to see the modern world. He was a huge hit. Then you get Gerald McBoing-Boing, a kid who can only speak in sound effects. It's like the ultimate expression of their whole less is more style. And then they'd just pivot and do something like The Telltale Heart, a surreal horror cartoon so intense it was the first cartoon ever to get an X rating in the UK. Wow.
Just look at this timeline. It shows you how fast they just took over. It's amazing. Within a few short years, these absolute rebels who were literally on a picket line outside Disney's studio were now consistently beating him at his own game at the Academy Awards. It just proved everyone was starving for something new and different. But then, the story takes a dark turn. The Red Scare's shadow.
You see, the very things that made UPA so special, its progressive politics, its roots in union activism, well, those things also put a giant target on its back. As the paranoia of the McCarthy era and the Hollywood blacklist started to sweep through town, a very long, dark shadow fell right over UPA.
And the pressure was absolutely intense. It came from the very top. This is a direct quote from Walt Disney himself in his testimony before the House Un-American Activities Committee. He said he'd refer to the UPA studio as, "That's where those damn commies downriver went to work." I mean, can you imagine? Your biggest competitor is essentially telling the government that your studio is a nest of communists.
After that, the dominoes just fell one by one. Their distributor, Columbia Pictures, put the screws to them, forcing UPA to clean house. And in 1952, they fired John Hubley, the main architect of their entire style, because he refused to name names for the committee. Firing him was like, it basically decapitated the studio. All this other amazing talent was forced out, leaving this huge creative vacuum. And the work? It just got safer, more boring, more formulaic. They had to destroy the very thing that made them unique just to stay in business.
And that brings us to the next truly bizarre chapter, from Magoo to Godzilla. Because surviving came at a very strange price. By 1959, the studio was just a shell of its former self, and it gets sold to a businessman named Henry Saperstein. And let's just say he had a very different vision for the place.
So let's just reset for a second. This is the studio of high-minded, modernist, Oscar-winning art.
And it was about to become the #1 importer of giant Japanese monsters into America. No, I'm not kidding. You see, the new owner, Henry Saperstein, didn't see an art studio. He saw a pile of intellectual property that he could exploit. So he started pumping out cheap TV shows, sure. But his real genius move? He pivoted the entire company into co-producing and distributing monster movies from Japan's legendary Toho studios. Suddenly, UPA, the home of Mr. Magoo, was the company bringing Invasion of Astro Monster and War of the Gargantuas to drive-ins across America. He even did this completely bonkers thing where he bought a Japanese spy movie, threw out the script, and hired a young Woody Allen to write a whole new set of funny dialogue for it, creating the comedy What's Up, Tiger Lily? Just a total 180.
So what happened to UPA? Well, the studio itself eventually just faded away. But its ghost, man, its ghost is one of the most powerful forces in the history of animation. So let's talk about that enduring legacy and how a studio that failed actually ended up winning the war for animation's soul. It's kind of like UPA had two kids, and they couldn't have been more different from each other. On one side, you have studios like Hanna-Barbera. They looked at UPA's limited animation style and saw a brilliant way to save money and crank out tons of TV shows like the Flintstones. You could call that the economic victory. But then on the other side, you had artists all over the world, especially in places like Yugoslavia with the Zagreb School, who saw the UPA style as artistic freedom. It was a third way, something that wasn't Disney and wasn't Soviet propaganda, and that was the artistic victory.
And you can see that artistic victory everywhere today. I mean, you can draw a straight line from UPA's core ideas to some of the best, most iconic cartoons of the last few decades. That graphic minimalist look, that's Dexter's Laboratory. Those stunning abstract backgrounds, pure Samurai Jack. The stylized, powerful character designs, hello, the Powerpuff Girls. Even that idea of using color for emotion, that's a huge part of what makes a show like Steven Universe so powerful. All of it goes right back to the language UPA invented in the 50s.
So that brings us right back to the big question, doesn't it? UPA, the company, it failed. It went out of business. But their ideas, the idea that animation could be flat and graphic and smart and artistic, those ideas basically took over. They became the language of modern animation. So you have to ask, did that little studio of rebels actually win the war for the soul of animation, even though they lost the battle for their own survival? It's something to think about.